if you go to page 6 of the PDF package, there's an individual named Jane Perez who I was communicating with, and she was acting as the property manager. I was unsure of Maureen Deegan's relationship with the property at the manager at the time. There was some confusion. If you read these emails, especially the one from Jane Perez on Wednesday, August 20th at 7:25 p.m., she agrees to a new tenancy under new terms. It says your rent will not increase and you'll not be billed month-to-month fees until further notice. If this is reconsidered, a notice of 30 days should be provided. And I agreed to that. And then on the 20th and subsequently, the owner of the property accepted rent. This, in my opinion, creates a new tenancy, and I'm not a holdover tenant. So that the notice to vacate on the 27th is invalid, even if deemed appropriately served. But I am not a holdover tenant. That there was a new tenancy created under original terms. That new tenancy has a 30-day notice for anything. However, if you go back up in that email chain, Maureen Deegan on July 30th terminated the original lease that the plaintiff is stating I'm a holdover from. That lease was terminated. The lease was terminated after I was trying to get a renewal. What the plaintiff had testified stating that, oh, we couldn't get pay stubs and we couldn't renew, it is not the full story. It's very deceptive. I was trying to pay rent and sign a renewal, and Maureen Deegan refused rent, refused, front rent, and refused to send me a renewal. And then after that, after the lease had been terminated, a new tenancy was created with a new property manager, Jane Perez. Now, if you look in the emails that I've included too, late rent was accepted frequently, and I had always caught up. And these circumstances, I paid late fees, and these circumstances, I believe, create an estoppel where late rent should be accepted. That the strict due dates for rent are a little bit. They've accepted late rent, but I've always paid. And I did a little bit of math as well regarding my tenant ledger. Now, I provided the properties ledger, which is incorrect. Doing a little bit of math and with the help of Excel, my original lease that was terminated on the 20th provides for my last month's rent free. And in two sections in that lease, there's a $1,900 credit that should have been applied at the end of that lease before the new tenancy was created. That credit was never applied. There was an erroneous credit or erroneous charge of $129 for month-to-month fees in August. And my biggest issue is that I was handed a notice to vacate. I paid on the October 27th, and on the 29th, I paid rent, and that was accepted by the property. After applying the last month's rent to my ledger and removing the erroneous month-to-month fees, which again the plaintiffs come here today saying that they've again charged erroneous month-to-month fees, my outstanding balance after paying in October, 2 days after the notice to vacate, is $167. And furthermore, after reviewing my lease, I was erroneously charged daily late fees, which are not selected in my lease. And if I add those up, after I paid my rent in October, I'm actually on October 29th, I'm actually ahead $63. And it's pretty clear that the plaintiff has been not applying credits in my favor, misapplying credits in their favor, not negligent in keeping accounting of a tenant ledger. And then, sending these, incorrect notices to vacate when, I'm at the time, if you don't count the daily late fees, or if you do count them in my favor, I'm ahead $63. If you don't count them, I'm behind $167. And then on the 5th of November, I get an eviction filed against me. The math doesn't check out, and I'm pretty apoplectic that this whole scenario has transpired.
Okay, so on the ledger that they provided me, that you sent, Mr. Bernales, you sent me, it says that there's a payment you made of $1,150 on the 29th of October,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And you said there's another payment you made that's not on this ledger?
There's my lease has the original lease has a last month free and a lease credit at the end of the lease for the last month, which would have been in August, of $1,099. And that was never applied to my ledger.
Is that correct, Miss Deegan? Can you verify that? Was there
we did offer 1 month free, but that's under the conditions that you pay timely and on time. And he did not fulfill that obligation to receive the rent concession.
Those terms aren't in the contract at all. They're not in the lease agreement.
So, and who's Jane Perez?
We hired a company for maintenance technician. She was never a property manager, but she was at the company and she was willing to help me to evict Mark Vernalis.
But it talks about, it almost sounds like she's in the emails that have you seen the emails that between her and Mr. Vernalis?
Most of them I have. I asked her to discuss things with him because he sent me a very aggressive text in July, I believe, and I refused to chat with him, talk with him, engage with him anymore. I am concerned about his behavior towards me.
Maureen, I was going to give you flowers yesterday. You ignored me.
Let's just address the court, Mr. Vernalis, please. And so, do you have what the conditions were, Mr. Vernalis, to get your free month rent, or I guess your concession of a free month?
Yeah, it's in the plaintiff's in the lease that's included in the plaintiff's exhibits they sent me today that are with the court. I think it is.
I can jump in. I could share my screen if you like.
I see the lease contract, but it does say if we don't receive your, you highlight late fees, and you highlight, that's the only thing else. There's a highlight about giving a notice to vacate and filing suit. But where does it talk about
it's on page 8, section 32 on the right side. It says leasing special, last month's rent free.
Sorry, it's on page 12 of the plaintiff's package where it says lease addendum for concession, credit, or other discount. And the box is checked one-time concession, 1099, but the condition says as long as you fulfill your obligations for the entire term, you will receive the concession. So that's what I think Maureen is talking about. And
correct.
But I paid all of my rent through August.
As an incentive bonus for you signing your TA, you're choosing our property and agreeing to fulfill your obligations for the entire term. The TA lease contract will receive a concession, credit, or discount described below. in session 1099 charges for the last month of the lease. And so with the payment of his late fees and the accepting of the late fees, is that not complying with the terms of his lease contract?
On Friday, Judge, I asked if it would be helpful to have the repeated notices that the late rent was not appropriate throughout the term, and I thought it was not relevant. So
Was
now
it
it's
a
relevant.
lease violation to
Yeah.
not pay on time?
Yes.
But then does does it say in that those notices that the property does not waive their rights to proceed on an eviction even with late fees being paid, or what does that language say on those notices?
It's in the lease, which I need to now find. But section 3 of the lease says you must pay your rent on or before the first day without demand. There are no exceptions, and you agree that not paying rent on time is a material breach. And then if we go to the
What section is that?
sorry, section 3 of the lease.
Okay, section 3. Okay, I see that.
And then we've got the default sections, which I'm just scrolling to. Acts of default. You section 23. You will be in default if you don't timely pay rent, including monthly recurring charges. It's as clear as that. And then there's a section on eviction as well, which just
Okay. So it does say we may end your right to occupancy by giving you a 24-hour written notice to vacate, right? It says we may. Didn't say we will or we must. It's permissive, right? So it allows them to do that, but we'll still accept rent, there's something. So you're saying that because even though we accepted rent late with the late fees, that doesn't waive our rights to continue to ask for possession if we chose to evict. Is that what you're saying?
could you restate that?
That even though because the rent is late, you could ask for the tenant to remove themselves, ask for the file for an eviction, even though they all accepted the rent and the late fees with the rent to remain in the property.
The event of default occurs upon non-payment of rent. So as soon as default occurs, whether or not it occurred repeatedly throughout the term, it's an event of default, which gives the landlord the right to terminate as a remedy within 24 hours. And in this case, we waited the statutory period as well. And as of November, I believe the landlord stopped accepting rent. So no, I don't think that there's been a waiver at all.
So for November's rent, did Mr. Vernalis offer November's rent and it was refused?
I'll turn that over to Ms. Deegan.
No, he hasn't offered November rent.
And so, I mean, because I think primarily this is a holdover case. There's been no new lease filed. There's been no, it's not a month-to-month situation. They've already said, well, we're going to go ahead and forego the month-to-month situation since that notice was not delivered, but there is no new lease, even though the one-liner that you sent from Miss Perez says, well, you know, that's not really a lease. I think that the notice to vacate monthly charges. Is it on the notice to vacate in October?
Mhm.
Is it due to the lease ending or is it for non-payment or both?
It's for both. And I think the language in there is regarding the demand for rent. So tenant has failed to pay rent, leading to the demand for rent. But tenant has been holding over since I mean, if we want to turn to Judge, if we want to turn to the first page of the defendant's exhibits, he says, July 30th, I am not moving out. He just
I'm sorry,
says,
say that again, please.
July 30th email in defendant's exhibit package, the first page there, right in the center of the page. He gets his notice. I am not moving out. And so I don't think it could be any clearer than that, Judge.
You're saying the email from, I guess, Park Terrace manager says that the will not be renewed, right?
Well, I'm also noticing that these aren't exactly complete emails. They're kind of cherry picked, but there is an email that's, our notice to terminate 30-day notice at our exhibit 2 on plaintiff's page 18. That's July 10th, 2025. And you can believe that between June 11th and then that notice and July 28th and July 30th, that there was back and forth. And the response, the cherry-picked response here, very artfully placed in the center of the page, but it says very clearly, I am not moving out. This is where the landlord is at, Your Honor, is that they had a tenant.
Which email are you talking about, Miss Alsaraj?
The one that says I'm not moving out.
What day is that? I don't. Is
July.
that in defendants?
Yes, defendants, page 2. July 30th, 2025 at 8:12 a.m.
Or it's July, at what time?
8:12.
Okay. I would like to pay the balance and I'm not moving out the lease, please send the renewal. Because he's saying, I want to stay, right? And he's trying to get current and has get an agreement to continue to live there. And I guess there was some lack of communication, or Miss Deegan did not want to communicate anymore directly with Mr. Bernales due to the prior interactions that they may have had.
Right, I will only communicate via email.
Okay. All right. And so, Mr. Bernales, why, I'm going to give you the last say, why do you think that you should still be allowed to stay there, even though they said, we're not going to renew your lease?
I was offered a renewal by Marine, and I was.
If you provided pay stubs and proof that you could continue to afford the lease there, otherwise having to pay or chase you after you for late fees and that, it gets more administrative work on their part. They're saying you may not qualify to continue to stay here if you can't show us that you're like reapplying, right? When you do an application for an apartment, they wanted to see proof of your ability to remain there and pay your rent on time.
Yeah. So my situation at that time during July, at the end of June, I was surprisingly terminated from my employment, and wrongfully terminated. And I expressed this to Marine in July. I said, hey, I was fired. And then the roofing company that I was working for sued me for $1 million, and they offered me a $10,000 settlement. Like, so I get sued and they say, hey, here's $10,000, take less than what you're owed, and, bump on down the road. and I was owed about $31,200 in commissions from this roofing company. And I talked to Maureen, and Maureen came to the door on July 10th. And I said, hey, if you can just like wait a little bit, I have this $10,000 settlement offer. It's only going to go up, right? Can you just like, can we just like, I'm going to pay. I've offered her like assignment or any type of security. And, you know, she was not so nice to me regarding that. And then said, oh, if you can't pay today, I'm going to evict you, etc. I had lost my employment, but I was about to get like a little bit of a settlement, a decent settlement. And I had offered to the property to increase the security deposit and front pay rent in lieu of the employment interruption. So that would have been a pay stub. And I was in the process of getting that going, and Maureen was just impatient. And I'd offered to her to, and some of it in writing to, to pay. And because I wanted to stay, because one, my employment was just interrupted. It's going to be hard for me to lease somewhere else. And I really want to be here. I've been very unstable in my housing for years. I've got a little recovery community here. It's like the best place for me to stay sober is like in a place where I'm, around a community. I repeatedly offered to pay, and Maureen wouldn't accept. And then furthermore, in July, if you look at these emails, she sent me, and none of these emails are cherry picked. This is just straight copied from my Gmail account. There's literally nothing that I've cherry picked or placed these emails. I've just copied and pasted, downloaded that whole email chain. There's nothing else there that exists. She responded by falsely stating that an eviction had been filed in July. And she did that verbally prior to the July 30th email, beginning on the 10th, where she says, I want you out. I want you out. She said this all verbally to me, and then also over the phone, where we had some nasty interactions where, I'm sure we both probably could have been used a better tone. But she falsely, and I made these false statements about eviction that I said, oh, I have an eviction filed. And then I had to immediately settle this employment dispute for far less money. And that may or may not be relevant to this, but I've lost a lot of money, well over $20,000 because of the false statements that Maureen had made. And instead of be confrontational or litigious, I'm literally trying to work. I hurt my back in August 3rd, severely. And I know that you're rolling your eye.
I saw the email about being in pain and
I couldn't walk.
Are you working right now, Mr. Vernalis?
I'm doing delivery driving, and I'm hopefully later today going to get hired for another roofing company. But I spent about 2 months, on 3 weeks in bed. I've got MRIs of herniated discs, and all the medical stuff is there if we need to go through that process.
Miss Deegan, I noticed that when he said I offered to pay rent, and you kind of shook your head. We
didn't have those conversations that he described. And I'm sorry, I'm hearing my voice back. So if I communicate weirdly, it's kind of that. He lost his job, or told me he lost his job about April. He was put on a payment plan. That went pretty well, not exactly according to the plan, but it went well enough. And so he lost his job, I think in March or so. And those conversations of, oh, I've got $10,000 coming to you, I'm going to pay. I've never told him that he was going to be evicted. I just didn't want to talk to him. So I was pretty mute when I would serve him, whatever. And after aggressive texts, after the payment plan wasn't paid on time necessarily, I stopped with the texts. I stopped with phone calls. So that all stopped pretty soon after, probably June. So those communications just did not happen.
And did you authorize Ms. Perez to re-sign a lease with between Old South Austin Apartments
No,
and Mr.
not at all.
Bernales?
No, Perez, it's Miss Perez.
Okay.
No, not at all. She talked me into giving him another chance. I was very against it, but we did it. She went into a payment plan with him and he never paid.
That's it, correct?
Okay. All right.
I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I think that Ms. Deegan's testimony should be disregarded just based off of, you know, she has an email saying that an eviction was filed and it wasn't. But then she's saying a couple days prior to that, that when we spoke and we had a tense conversation, right? But she didn't falsely claim that I was being evicted, which she did, which is I'm saying that she did. And boy, that would maybe, you know, and you're a little bit of, you know, that's kind of hostile to tell someone you're being evicted and to lie about it. Like, oh, she wasn't lying about it a few days prior to sending the email where she was lying about filing an eviction against me. I think that that's pretty disingenuous. Also, I have other emails from Ms. Perez saying that, you know, we no longer manage the property. Well, there she's stating that she manages the property. And Maureen saying that she gave Ms. Perez authority to negotiate with me and agreed to terms that Perez and I had discussed. Also, if we consider the inaccuracies in the ledger, which the plaintiff has admitted to today, if you apply the credit that is stated in the lease, it's in section 3, but it's also stated in section 32 under special provisions where it says 1 month, there's 1 month rent, and that statement of 1 month rent supersedes any conflicting section of the lease. I believe I'm owed that 1 month credit, just as other tenants have received it here as it's stated in the lease. If that 1 month credit is applied, I'm at worst $160 delinquent. But if, you know, in my opinion, I'm $63 ahead. And that, you know, no matter what the plaintiffs say, that on October 29th, I was like at or near current. And in no way should they have been able to file an eviction against me 5 days into November. And shut down my payment portal and then not notify me that the manager that I was dealing with was no longer managing the company. I mean, either way you shake it, you know, I'm basically current at the end of, I'm either ahead or a couple $100 behind, you know, like 160 some dollars behind at the end of October. And, you know, like,
But your lease ended on August 12th, right?
yeah.
And so, didn't they give you a notice back in July that they were not going to renew your lease? So you don't have a lease. It's on a month-to-month basis. But I mean, it's when they gave you a notice to vacate, then on October 27th, you know, as on being on a month-to-month basis, why wouldn't you be able to move out? Because not only were you late with rent, I mean, they're saying you're holding over.
I don't believe I'm a holdover tenant. I believe that there's a new lease that was created. I have, you know, like I expressed to the apartment that I had interruptions in my job. And then also I was disabled for a couple months. Maureen is not speaking with me. There's nobody to speak to at the property. And I have been trying to pay, and I essentially got current at the end of October. And, you know, I think that I should have like a reasonable accommodation for being disabled for a couple months, to be able to like not, you know, be out on it. You know, I don't have anywhere to go. And I am trying to pay. I'm not sitting here saying, hey, I have the money and I'm not paying. Like, I'd be happy to show you my bank accounts and show you that as soon as I've had the money, I've paid it. And I've been, busting my hump to try to interview and find long-term employment. I've been delivery driving in the past couple weeks, like 10 to 12 hours a day, just to earn a little bit of money, so that I can keep a roof over my head. And, like the notice to vacate, I don't think, 24-hour notice and the yeah, would have been late for October, but they misapplied the credits and they're telling me that there's amounts that I owe that are just completely incorrect.
So that amount in the notice to vacate, the $2,545.03, you're saying is incorrect.
Yeah, that the 1 month free rent should have been applied to my ledger.
But your monthly rent is $1,099, right?
Yeah.
And so that's still leaves, 25, 45 minus 1,099. That's still another, 1,446. Are you saying that there's inaccuracies on the ledger that almost totaled that 1,446?
No, but I paid $1,150 2 days after that notice to vacate. And then there were other inaccuracies of $129.03 for erroneous month-to-month fees.
Let me get to that ledger again real quick. On October 29th. Okay. But for November, there's been nothing paid, right?
Yeah, but I also received an eviction, and they've stopped payment. They've stopped allowing me to pay, and I believe that the eviction was in that we're here now. I would happily pay rent. I can't pay online. That's how I've paid. But also, like, I think that this eviction should be dismissed because the amounts that they say I owed are incorrect.
Okay. And Miss Al-Siraj, any last response?
Yes, Judge. The lease, there was no new lease. There's no entitlement to credit for a tenant who shows by their ledger that they're not fulfilling their monthly obligations to pay rent on or before the 1st. And while we certainly sympathize with the ups and downs of life, the landlord is entitled to possession for one, a tenant that has held over past the proper termination date, and two, a tenant that has been delivered and served a notice to vacate according with the Texas Property Code and the lease.
Okay. And what were you asking for in attorney's fees?
Well, I brought it down from the last time, and we're asking for $2,000, Judge, because as you can probably have gleaned from this exchange, that's been very contentious. There's been a year's worth of correspondence to go through. There's been a lot of back and forth, more than would be associated with a regular, straightforward eviction. So I can go through my testimony for attorney's fees, but that's
okay. I'm not gonna issue a judgment today unless I get to review this today or tomorrow. Maybe I'll get a chance to do it tomorrow. Today's Monday. I will issue it by Wednesday at the latest, but I need to go through some of this paperwork and to see whether or not that I think the plaintiff prevails in this matter. Unfortunately, Mr. Vernalis. However, I don't know what the damages are, and so I want to go back through the ledger, go back through the notices, and review that. And so it has been very contentious, and I sympathize with your situation as well. However, let me go through this and make a decision. I'm not going to do it right now because I want to review some of this stuff and read it carefully before I do that. but most likely I am going to side on the side of the plaintiff. And so let me figure out what that is and what the damages are before I issue that judgment. I'm not kidding myself to think that maybe this is not going to end here, because whether I found in favor of Mr. Bernales or whether I find in favor of South Austin Apartments, either side can appeal this judgment and get a brand new trial at county court. Of course, there would be a bond posted, but it depends on who I think is entitled to the greater right of possession of the property. And there's no entitlement, Mr. Vernalis, unfortunately, to continue to remain there because you really want to. And I don't know why you really want to. You may have some reasons that are valid and personal, but the statement you say, well, I don't really know where I can go right now without proof of an income. Yeah, so you find yourself in a tough spot, but that's not their burden to carry. But let me go ahead and make the decision. I will issue the judgment and send it to both parties when I have it. It won't be any later than Wednesday. Okay.
Thank you, Judge.
And so
Thank
I'm
you,
going to
Judge.
go back and what Mr. Vernalis filed to hopefully come up with the correct amount that I feel is reasonable and necessary, and what the burden shows. I want to look again at what the items that you pointed out, Ms. Al-Siraj, about that Mr. Vernalis would not be entitled to the credit that he has, thought he should have gotten as having fulfilled his year term of back in August. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.